Hello and welcome to the Town Hall Century of Story and Song, Broadway by the Year, the Kander and Ebb Years. My name is Mele Araya and I'm the host of tonight's program. The Town Hall was founded in 1921 by a group of suffragists who wanted the space to be a home to adult education, consciousness raising, and civil discussion. Today, we are honored to have with us a scholar, a theater artist, and one of the most important composers in American history. And we're all here to speak about the work of the latter, the great John Kander. A few introductions. Scott Siegel, our own, Town Hall's very own Scott Siegel, is the author of 48 books, including the Encyclopedia of Hollywood and American Film Comedy. He has created more than 400 major concerts that have been performed all over the world. He has written, produced, and directed concerts for Michael Feinstein, created scores of nightclub acts that have played at major clubs around the globe, but is perhaps best known as the creator, writer, director, and host of Town Hall's signature series, Broadway by the Year, which is currently celebrating its 20th critically acclaimed season. Jim Leve is a professor of musicology and coordinator of music history. His books include a monograph on the Broadway composer, John Kander, and lyricist Fred Ebb, and American musical theater. His latest publication, Broadway Babies, Children, Childhood, and Musical Theater, is an essay collection on the construction of childhood in musical theater. Leve has also done research on Italian comic opera and published a modern edition and English translation of a 1657 comic opera. He is currently completing Disability and Musical Theater, Dramaturgy, Accommodation, and Access. Very excited for that. The last person I have to introduce does not need an introduction. He is John Kander, a composer whose work as part of the songwriting team Kander and Ebb spanned 6 decades. Known for musicals such as Cabaret, Chicago, Woman of the Year, and Kiss of the Spider Woman, together they have been inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame and received the Kennedy Center honors. John Kander himself was awarded the National Medal of Arts in 2013 by the then President Barack Obama. Thank you all for joining us today.
Well, it's our pleasure. I can tell you that.
We're here.
Yes, thank you. I'm so excited to have such a robust group of people in various sort of relationship to Broadway here with us today. And I want to start because we're here with John Kander, with you, John Kander, John. Let's start at the beginning. You studied with very notable American classical composers early on in life. And I'm curious as to what you heard before that period, even as a child. Like what songs and compositions, what was on the radio? What captured your attention first?
Well, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, which is exactly the center of the country during the Depression. And so a lot of what I heard on the radio. In those days, popular music was at least 50% made up of musical theater songs. We didn't even have the term musical theater, so that the connection between the rest of the country and Broadway was very strong. At the same time, the Metropolitan Opera broadcasts were happening, and I think from the time I was 7, fascinated by them in the same way that I was fascinated by, in a kind of primitive way, by musical theater. It was all about telling stories in music, telling stories in song. And to this day, I don't really differentiate very much between the two disciplines. Every country has its version of musical theater, whether it's opera, operetta, zarzuela, musical comedy. And somehow or other, at least in our house, it was all kind of the same. I don't know if that made any sense or not, but
No, absolutely. By the time you were at Oberlin and Columbia, the book musical and the golden age of musical theater was well on its way. What was it like studying with opera composers at this time? What were conversations and discussions about opera and operetta versus musical theater like when, say Oklahoma was coming out or other musicals like that?
well, again, it's all mixed up into one. The head of the music department at Columbia was a composer named Douglas Moore, and he and his family became my surrogate family for all the time I was in New York. And he, not only was a distinguished opera composer, the most famous work being the Ballad of Baby Doe, but he loved musical theater, excuse me. And I was a kind of musical schizo at the time. I had an assistantship in the opera workshop at Columbia while I was there getting my master's. And again, this, I didn't really think about a line between the forms. I was working on operatic scenes just as a coach, and at the same time playing around with musical theater, which I had at Oberlin. I wrote one really terrible opera, which actually has a big black cover that's very flat. It's great for copying music on. But one night, I really didn't know what direction to go in because the classical music was certainly where I spent my time listening. At the same time, anything that involved music and theater fascinated me. And I was living in New York with Broadway next door to me. And one drunken night, Douglas Moore and I were sort of in our cups, and he suddenly turned to me and he said, if I had it to do all over again, I think I'd write for Broadway. And that statement meant a lot to me, and it clarified a lot of things. And I think probably his saying that to me, plus the fact that I think I realized that my talents as an opera composer were limited. So it sort of put me in that direction. From then on, I focused my ambitions isn't the right word. I don't think I've ever been very ambitious, but my energies in musical theater.
Well, thank you for that. Jim, I was wondering if you could also contextualize that period for us, particularly the early 50s in musical theater.
Well, generally that's viewed as the golden age of the book musical, the integrated book musical, the Rodgers and Hammerstein model being, the one that was dominant and that people were emulating at the time. But by the end of the 50s, I think there was starting to be a separation, especially because of rock music becoming or replacing popular music as the main musical genre. So also, I think the golden age musical, or the Rodgers and Hammerstein model, was starting to feel a little bit like it couldn't respond to that post-World War II optimism. But at the same time, it was the golden age. So My Fair Lady, West Side Story are these years. In fact, John, I think, worked on West Side Story, and then Gypsy, as a pianist and also as a dance arranger for the music for Gypsy, pianist for West Side Story. So that's what was going on. Is on one hand, it was the golden age, and there were these great musicals being written, and that generation of Rodgers and Hammerstein era composers and lyricists were really, at the top of their game. But then there was this new generation, which I tend to call the, post Rodgers and Hammerstein generation, or the first post Rodgers and Hammerstein generation, which was John and Fred and Sondheim and Cy Coleman and Bach and Harnick, and that whole generation, I think, was the one who was going to, take it to the next level.
I'd like to just interject something here about Golden Age. Somebody, not me, that wisely said the Golden Age is the decade that just passed.
Yeah.
It's the one that you weren't there for. And when we were writing, my generation, the Golden Age, no, I would say that this is during Rodgers and Hammerstein period, where it was, but the Golden Age was the age before that, with George Gershwin and Jerome Kern and Cole Porter. That's what we were told. And then when the time came, when my generation began to function in the theater, the Golden Age was Hammerstein and Rodgers. And then I just heard somebody, which one of you, I don't know, said, God help me, that ours was the Golden Age. And I can hardly wait to find out what the Golden Age is. The next one's going to be. I'd like to be around for it.
Well, it's interesting. I feel like.
Sorry, John, when you were making that shift from being a graduate student at Columbia to starting to write musicals, were you basically emulating Rodgers and Hammerstein in terms of the approach, or were you thinking about doing something different?
I was lucky because I was in those days a pretty good pianist, and so I was hired to do a lot of things. That really helped me. I got to do 3 years of stock, doing a musical a week, conducting, or at an off-Broadway musical that and I was also playing auditions for people. And so it was like every step in, I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly, but the shows that we were working on when I was doing stock were Annie Get Your Gun, all of the Rodgers and Hammerstein. And I think, without being academic about it, you sort of begin to find out the mechanics of these pieces. I have a feeling that the authors of those pieces probably in some way examined their predecessors' work. So it's a long evolution. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but I think musical theater, just like all of theater, reflects the time that it's in. And it's not so much influences from other generations as it is reflecting the time that you're living in.
May I ask that same question, and maybe in a different way, just to say, were there particular composers that you sort of idolized and
oh yes,
considered this is a model for me?
I don't know if model is the point. I really loved listening to Mark Blitzstein. I loved listening to Jerome Kern. And you could not like Rodgers and Hammerstein. I think we all develop some kind of personal taste or reaction to stuff which doesn't have to do with history, which doesn't have to do with necessarily what's happening, what you ought to be listening to. I I know that certainly the influences on me, which are just subconscious, would be very much Kern, very much Blitzstein, uh, uh, and and the rest of those folks like Wagner, Strauss, Puccini, and Mozart.
Well, I think Jim had mentioned your work with Jerome Robbins in particular. And I was wondering if you could talk about, being a rehearsal pianist, a dance arranger. Like, what was it like to have those kinds of jobs as you're figuring out composing at the same time?
I think, and this I'm glad about, I think I really concentrated on the job that I was doing without thinking of, oh, how does this matter to me? I did dance arrangements for 2 Broadway shows. One was Gypsy, and one was Irma la Douce. With Gypsy, it was a learning experience more than anything else, and sort of hanging around a lot more than collaborating. In Irma la Douce, which was a couple of years later, it was much more fun because I sort of learned the ropes, and I was with Anna White, who was a choreographer that was really fun to work with. And so I learned a lot about looking at music and extending it and working with dance. And that was a big experience for me, more so actually than Gypsy. Gypsy was about fear.
Well, you've worked with, incredible people. And I was wondering if you could just say something about what it was like to work with Jerome Robbins.
Well, he was, I don't know how to say that. Everybody says he's a genius. Well, he was a genius. He was very inventive, he had a very short fuse, which I watched him being with other people, but he had a vision of what he wanted, which was very clear to him, and it took a while for him to get that vision out. But when he did, it was masterful. With Anna White, it was much more like, let's get in a rehearsal room and improvise.
Mm.
And
that's been more of your style since, hasn't it? With Fred and
right, collaboration is. I think I'm in the theater because I really like making art with other people. That's probably why I'm not home writing chamber music. It's we're all different, and I'm working on a piece now with 2 longtime friends of mine, Susan Stroman and Tommy Thompson, and we meet all the time, all Zooming this year, but it's always a pleasure, and it always was for me. The rehearsal room is the most wonderful place in the world, and also the safest. I don't know how to explain that, but you're in. I mean, when it's at its best, you're in this room with a lot of nice, talented people, and together you're all trying to make some kind of art. And you really fuck up sometimes, and sometimes you do something wonderful, but you're all having the experience together. And for me, that's very gratifying and satisfying.
We're talking about, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, because I don't know if I'm jumping on your question, Malay, but how did you know when you met Fred Ebb? What was the moment when you knew that you were the right mix between you two? Could you put that into words, that moment when you knew that he was going to be your partner and it was going to work?
Well, I can describe what happened.
That was my question. Good.
Without being able to maybe understand it. We were both signed to the same publisher, a guy named Tommy Belando. He also put Jerry and Sheldon together. Anyway, we were both signed to Tommy, and we were working with other people. And Tommy Belando said, literally, this is the quote, "I think you two guys should meet each other. I think you'd like each other." And so we did meet each other, and we started writing immediately. I mean, we were pregnant from the time we shook hands. And I don't think there was ever a moment where either one of us said, aha, this is it. I just think we couldn't stop writing. It was, and that continued really up until Fred's death. We, with all of our differences as people, writing was always fun. And I mean that in the best sense of fun. And it never stopped being that. I was not brought up to live in agony, and I think whatever career I've had has been not out of any sort of drive, but because I really just wanted to have a good time. I think you probably can explain that better than I can.
Well, I was going to ask, John, what things sparked you both? Was there ever a certain type of source material? Was it looking in the news and something would happen, or would be you went out to a party and, you both observed the same thing and then, you sat down to write it? Like, what kind of things would get you sparked on a song or get you started?
It had to do with the project. We didn't write all that much that was not theater. We did some, and we wrote special material for people. We tried being pop songwriters for about a week, and we were terrible. But if there's a story and there are people in the story that interest you, then it all became easier and fascinating. I don't think we ever. Well, I mean, once we had some power over our lives, I think we just did things that we wanted to do. I don't think we would have been very good at being just for hire. Not because there's anything wrong with that, but because I'm not sure we knew how to do that. We fell in love with our characters, or we fell in love with an atmosphere. And I think when we were doing our best work, it was those moments where we really understood the people we were writing for. We would improvise together a lot. The amazing thing for Fred, and this may be the answer to when did I know? Fred could improvise in rhyme and meter in the way that I could improvise at a keyboard. So we wrote in the same room at the same time, and I could really be improvising, and if a melodic line came out or a rhythm or something, Fred could begin to improvise. I don't know how he did it. I've never known anybody else who really could. And So because of that, we wrote very fast, and we tore up very fast. I But the process was always about, I think, the truth of the character, the truth of the atmosphere. I don't ever remember in our many decade career together, one of us said, "Oh boy, let's write this. It'll be a big hit." I don't think either of us had, in the first place, I don't think either of us had any idea what that meant. But we could recognize from ourselves if we thought we had been honest. And I mean, that sounds very lofty, and I don't mean it that way, but that was our pleasure. I mean, the rest of writing phony stuff is really hard.
When you looking back at your career, there's obviously had monster hits with Cabaret and with Chicago, but regardless of that, when you look back at your body of work, are there shows just because of the pleasure that you had writing them stand out in a way and say, these are my favorite shows, not because they were hits or not hits, but because I had so much fun creating them?
Sure. I mean, some of these shows were successes, some of them were flops. But for instance, The Rink was a wonderful experience. Spider-Woman was a wonderful experience. As a matter of fact, anything where we got to collaborate with Terrence McNally was a wonderful experience.
And Steel Pier, right?
Steel Pier was not Terrence, but it was a wonderful experience also. I mean, these are shows which didn't break any records, but they satisfied us. And the Scottsboro Boys, which is very iffy as a commercial entity, was a very satisfying experience. And for me, being spoiled as I am, if the experience isn't fulfilling, then I won't remember it with any pleasure.
That makes sense.
Jim, you've written about the contrasting sensibilities of John and Fred, and I was wondering if you could speak about that. How did their differences, make for such a specific and unique body of work?
Well, I hate to generalize, especially when John's here to correct me. And they wrote also, how do you kind of reduce that large body of work into, a description? But the one thing that I always felt was that Fred brought this acerbic wit, irony, and John brought to the table a sense of a lyricism and a romantic sensibility. And so for me, it was bringing those two things together, that there's this tension and love of entertainment, even though it's about something serious. And so in terms of their musical style, the style of their songs, I think it's that contrast, those opposites. And in terms of the style of the musicals themselves, it's using this joy and fun of the entertainment media to tell a serious story, whether it's Scottsboro Boys or Cabaret or Chicago. They're all using a kind of show within a show structure to explore something serious. But that's really getting more at their approach to musical theater or their brand of musicals, as opposed to the style of the music itself, which I think is this kind of contrast or tension, again, between Fred's wit and, let's say, cynicism and John's romanticism and lyricism.
Would you mind pointing out a particular song or even musical where you feel like that tension is clearest or most or richest, perhaps?
It's everywhere. I mean, it really is everywhere. I mean, there are certain scores where John can be more expansive, and there are other scores where they're writing, shorter numbers. But I'm trying to go to the more of that romantic side. Well, I think Still Pier is a place where I know it's a favorite score of John's, and it's a place where the score really soars. I mean, the music really soars. It's very lyrical and long breath kind of melody, but the story that's being told is, rather dark, and the relationships and the characters are rather dark. So I think we can point it in every score. I think, The Rink, of course, Cabaret in Chicago, but I'm going to go with Still Pier because of the real breadth of the melodies themselves.
I think he's right. When I look at it's more not me making a judgment about it, but remembering the experience of writing it was very gratifying. And if it was really gratifying to me, I'm sure it's because I had the opportunity to write that way. Fred's favorite show was Chicago, which he made no bones about. And the reason it was his favorite show was because, as he would say, it didn't have one ballad in it.
It's funny you mention that, because I was reading that he hated writing ballads, and he said that was sort of more your métier, that you more preferred to write ballads. I guess there's that tension there too, but that's funny. I was wondering about some of the performers who have become associated with you so much. Liza, obviously, it comes to mind, but not just Liza. But we can start with Liza, and because she was 17 when you met her, and you were both really very early in your careers. She was she got the Tony Award when she was 19 from Flora the Red Menace. Could you talk about that initial meeting and what you think the nature of your sort of lifetime relationship has been ever since?
Well, it's funny. I've told this before, but it's really true, and we were working on Flora the Red Menace, and as a sort of complicated favor to a friend of Fred's, Liza, 17-year-old Liza Minnelli, came knocking on Fred's door, which is where we were working. And you could almost stop the story there. She walked in the door and never left us. But it was instant. And I think it had to do with for a lot of reasons. There was this incredible energy and longing and talent. Holy smoke! And the things we were working on, songs from Flora when she came there, and she practically sang through the whole thing. And then we were smitten, and it looked for a long time that she was not going to get that part. And it's a long, complicated story, but thank God she did. And it was the show was a flop, but it was a great success for her and the beginning of her career. And it's hard to go into detail about this, but one of the Liza was just a dream to work with, and so smart. And you could also be absolutely sure that what you had written, she would sing. It's funny when somebody becomes sort of a superstar, which is something we did not envision. You think that everything's about them, but the fact is, all the stuff we wrote for Liza, she was totally at the service of what we wrote, and that's. But it was a three-way love affair, really, and actually, Fred became also, I think, not only her mentor, but an organizing and calming presence in her life. And I think she's always acknowledged that. She used to say on more than one occasion, she said, "Sometimes I think I'm a figment of Fred Ebb's imagination." The other person, very much the same way with a totally different personality, is Chita Rivera.
Mm-hmm.
And our work with her and our love for her, it was simple. I don't know how to explain. It's like trying to explain human relationships. We really we loved working with Chita. And not only that, but when we were writing, very often, we would write in this little ante room off of in Fred's apartment. And we would finish something really rough, and then we would rush to the phone and call Chita and sing it to her. Those two women and the performances that we collaborated on with them give me great joy.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Well, Scott, I have a question for you. You've worked with a lot of performers in different settings, and of course in sort of cabaret-esque settings as well. And I was wondering, what do you think that a Kander and Ebb song demands of a performer?
Well, yeah. John spoke to that. Really, it's the honesty. I mean, if you can't pull off a sense of authenticity in the song, as is true of all songs, but I think it's very much true for Kander and Ebb numbers, that you have to project the feeling, whether it's true or not, that you have somehow experienced what you're singing, and that's what actors are supposed to do at their best, and that's what it takes when you sing. Maybe this time, which I want to ask about actually when we get a chance, you have to get to the core of it. You have to be able to feel that you have lost a lot, and that this is, you're at the end of your rope, and you need to you're hoping that something is going to turn around, and that this is going to be a better moment, and you have to make it work. So I think a real sense of integrity is necessary to make these songs really work. You can't toss them off. They're not ditties. They don't write ditties. And
I think there are two more things also. If I
Yep.
could interject. What John calls the screamers, the belting songs. I
Mhm.
think you have to go big, but you also have to be able to go small. So you have to be intimate and introspective. So it's really this balance between and Liza Minnelli really gets this right in Flora, right in the beginning. So a quiet thing, but then all I need is one big break, where you get an ability to really go, really command the stage, but then also bring the spotlight into a pin spotlight. And one more thing is being able to tell a story. I think one of John and Fred's signatures is the story song. And I remember, I think I talked to Fred about this, but Miskite, Cabaret, Bobos, Colored Lights, All the Children in a Row, all these songs are long and they're connected and they have a big dramatic arc. And you get it a lot. There's one in Zorba also. And an ability to do that is, I think, really important because it occurs so often in their music.
Fred had a real gift in terms of being able, without making it academic, not only come up with an idea for a story, but to be able to sustain that idea in an entertaining way. And by entertaining, I think Jim and I must have talked about this years ago. Entertaining means really keeping people's attention. Hamlet is entertaining. Kiss of the Spider Woman has to be entertaining in order to work.
Yeah.
And so when very often people ask us, to our surprise, oddly enough, why did you choose such dark subjects? And the fact is, I think we were not social workers. We just found those stories involving and entertaining. Cabaret is no, that started Hal, but the pieces that we wrote often are often have subjects which are very dark or upsetting or emotional. And it's not that we ever thought of those pieces that way. We thought of those stories and those characters as interesting, entertaining. You know what's really hard to write? What's really hard to write is boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy meets on the subway. We actually didn't know how to do that very well. And when we tried, we failed, I think. And we won't get into what.
I mean, in the end, isn't this secret to it conflict? I mean, the better the conflict, the more opportunity to spin a yarn.
Yeah. And the more problems a person has, the more he has to say.
And thing, yeah.
So I think the pieces that had less of that were probably less good pieces.
Well, in the case of Cabaret and the Scottsboro Boys, I mean, these are very, very dark, real, historical issues that are being dealt with in some way. And I was wondering if that is different than some of the stuff you make up, or, for example, The Visit, which is, based on a story.
The Visit is actually about as dark as you can.
It is very dark, but I just mean that it's not, the Scottsboro Boys existed. The Nazis existed. How do you deal with the difference in dark matter or dark material when it's completely fictional, as opposed to when it actually does involve, very tragic history?
Well, for us, anyhow, and just speaking musically. For Cabaret, for instance, I went out and I listened to every bit of Berlin vaudeville and nightclub music that I could find. Lots and lots and lots and lots. And then I put it away and forgot about it. With the idiotic feeling that somehow or other that would come up inside of me, and what I was naturally going to be writing would reflect that. And it kind of did. It's the same way with Spider Woman and or Zorba, where there's history, or you're talking about a real an atmosphere that really exists. You have to do a certain amount of research, and I don't mean a dry academic kind of research. I mean, go soak yourself in it, and then it isn't like you make a list of things you've learned. Oh, that's they would use a minor second. But somehow or other, if you've soaked yourself in it, your fingers will figure it out. I really believe that. I don't know what the hell I'm doing most of the time, but I know that if I put my hands on the keyboard, my fingers will play something.
We talked a bit about Jerome Robbins and Liza Minnelli and Chita Rivera, but you've had a long list of amazing collaborators. And I was wondering if you could speak about you meeting and starting to work with Hal Prince.
Well, Hal Prince is really responsible for us. Hal, I had actually, when I wrote a musical with James and William Goldman, the brothers, who were both of whom became great writers. The three of us were very close friends. We grew up together, and we had a 9-room apartment on West 72nd Street for $275 a month, which I love saying. And we wanted to write something together. I mean, when you think of the chutzpah that we had, anyway, we wrote a piece together. The three of us. It was called A Family Affair, and we were in trouble out of town with it, primarily because of the director, I think, and because we were also such novices. And Hal, whom I knew, he came out of town, and literally I begged him to at least watch a rehearsal and see what he could do to help us. And he did. And originally he had thought that it would be just something easy. But then after watching rehearsal, he said he'd like to direct it, which is what I was hoping for. It was the first musical that Al ever directed. And so there were all of us first timers out there trying to survive, and he almost made it work. I mean, that's a big thing to say, because we didn't know what we were doing, and Hal was really smart. And in 10 days, he almost brought the piece together. We had a relationship that continued through that, and then when Fred and he hired Fred and me to write an adaptation of what became Flora the Red Menace for George Abbott to direct. And we did, and that show also was not a success, though, in spite of Liza. But he said something to me which I can't imagine any producer in his right mind ever saying to young writers. 2 weeks before we opened, he said, whatever happens with Flora, the day after it opened, we'll meet up in my apartment and start to work on the next piece. And Flora opened, and not a success. And the next day, we were at Hal's apartment working on a piece which eventually became Cabaret. When I think about it and I tell that story, I can only I can only wonder at what he did for us, and also because I think of his tradition in the theater and what he learned from Mr. Abbott, and his way of approaching creating set us on a path which served us really well for the rest of our lives.
How did you deal with Ward Baker with A Family Affair? How did that get negotiated? Because wasn't he directing Family Affair?
Yeah.
Was he just asked to step aside, or was there tension with that, or did he hand it over? Or did they collaborate?
Fortunately, I didn't have to be around for the conversation. But Word had directed The Fantastics, and which was this runaway off-Broadway hit.
Mhm.
And we had done nothing. And so we assumed that he was going to be wonderful at this, and the fact is, sad to say, he was not.
Mm. Well, just going down, thinking through some of your great collaborators, another, of course, is Bob Fosse.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that meeting and then that continued work that, went from Broadway and then to film.
Well, actually, we had a very good experience with Bobby. Certainly in the first part of it, the first time we actually worked together was on a television piece that he did with Liza. I think it's called Liza with a Z. And he was brilliant in staging, not only in staging the numbers and helping put the whole piece together, but also, his imagination was incredible. And we ended that experience with very good feelings towards each other. And then sometime later, when the Cabaret movie happened, I'm not quite, whether it was before or after, I'm not quite sure. But we had a very good time working with him then, and we wrote some new songs for the film. And then he and Gwen Verdon had long wanted to do an adaptation of Chicago, of the play Chicago, written by a woman named Maureen Watkins. But the rights were not available because after the sort of scandalous play that she wrote, as I understand it, she became a religious person and wouldn't have anything to do with it. But I think she died. I think that was because Bobby and Gwen called us, literally, this is what happened, and said that suddenly the rights were free. I think I have this story right, and we should get together and talk about it. And so we did, and long story short, we started writing. The writing period was blissful. Fred was doing the book with a collaboration with Bobby, and I was doing the score. And we would go up to and have our meetings with him, and we had a very good time putting the piece together. And then this is not about Bobby, the series about or anything like that. But we ended up going into rehearsal. Everything was fine, and then Bobby had a heart attack, and we had to stop after the first week of rehearsal. And eventually, he came back, and I think he was having a very difficult time dealing with his own mortality, or certainly what was happening with him. And he was then a much more complicated person to work with. But our experience with him up to that point was really terrific.
Because maybe this time I wanted to get to this question. Maybe this time was something that you had written earlier.
That's really
not in Cabaret originally, and Liza had recorded it earlier.
How
the decision that put it? How did it come about that it ended up in the score of of the film version of Cabaret?
We had written the song years before, and it was a song which certainly wasn't a popular song, but it was a song that Liza used and actually recorded, I think.
Yeah.
We were sitting in Bobby's office. This was while the film Cabaret was being put together, and there was a scene in the movie where Sally Bowles, because of an experience that she's had with Cliff, is thinking to herself, and these are kind of Bobby's words. He says she's thinking, well, maybe this time it's going to happen to me. Maybe this is the moment. He started improvising what our lyric said. He had never heard the song, I'm sure. And we didn't know what to do because we felt, considering what our job was, we should go out and write another song, except we had written it. And so we decided we should play it for him. And he fell in love with it. And it was because that song was saying exactly what he was improvising to us. And it's just an odd coincidence, really. I don't think we could have written another version of that piece, of that song. That would have been perhaps as good.
Well, that's why everybody uses it in the stage versions ever since.
Right. And yes, and now there is a scene which is, as that scene is constructed, you almost have to use it. But Cabaret, there's no point in going into this for a long time, but Cabaret is a musical that evolved and continues to evolve. When we first wrote it, and it was first done in 1966.
Yep.
But we started writing it a couple of years before that. The world and society were different than they were 20 years later when we revived it. And so we were able to go back with Hal and go through the piece and make the piece more honest, because in a funny way, society had become more honest in terms of what it expected. For instance, Cliff from the Isherwood, not only just from the Isherwood writing, but when you think about it, Cliff is a really gay character, but we couldn't have him be that, or at least that was what the three of us decided, four of us, originally, because in those days, if he had been a homosexual character, that would have been what the piece was about. In other words, that's not what we wanted to write about. And 20 years later, life had changed, society had changed, so that we could write a more honest character, and constantly made the show better. But then, as time goes on, I think the reason we keep rewriting it, or kept rewriting it, was because of history. The history that was happening right under our feet. the bad guys are still here. They never go away. Their costumes change. Their music changes. But it seems to me each time we come, and it's still going on, you come to do a major revival of Cabaret, you feel that you need to alter it, or not, maybe alter is the wrong word. You need to look at the world around you and make it more apparent to a contemporary audience what the show is about. I don't know, I'm not saying this very well, but history keeps repeating itself, doesn't it? It's horrifying, but true. And Cabaret is one of those pieces which the story keeps repeating itself. People not dealing with what's plainly in front of them, and the world swallows them up before they even recognize what's happening to them. And with each generation, that story happens in a slightly different way. So Cabaret keeps happening in a slightly different way.
John, I've always been fascinated, and I know we've talked about this before, but about the fact that as Cliff becomes more honest, he sings less and less. So at this point, we have a musical theater romantic lead who doesn't really sing. I mean, I flub it a little bit. He sings a little bit in Perfectly Marvelous, but for the most part, he doesn't have a solo anymore, like in the original. I mean, it starts with the movie, but the movie cut all the non-diegetic songs. But do you have any thoughts about that, or is?
Yeah, I have very specific thoughts about that, and that is that was not our decision. We wrote what I think is one of the best musical scenes that Freddie and I ever wrote for the revival of Cabaret, in which Cliff has a song called "Don't Go," and it's a very passionate song in which he's singing to her about the fact that if he's going to be a father, his life can change, and that please don't take this one chance away from it. It's really it's a moment I'm very proud of, and it's going from that very much straight into maybe this time. It's a big song for Cliff, bigger than anything has in the other versions, and it's been arbitrarily taken out in productions, but not with my approval, and it's going back in. Jim, do you know that song?
Yes. Oh yeah.
When it's there and when it's used, it's a big vocal moment for him, and when he doesn't have it, you're right, he's emasculated musically, and I think the piece is less because of it.
Just for everyone else, John and Fred wrote, I think I have it on a slide. I think it's at least 15 different songs in which Cliff actually sings. And in the original Broadway production, he ends up with the one. And then, as John said, they replaced it with Don't Go. And now we're left with, essentially nothing. So, but there are actually more than even the two songs we've been talking about there. It's a whole trunk full of Cliff songs. My favorite being Never in Paris. Which
that was a very early song. Freddie and I, this sounds like work, but it wasn't. I must have written 60 songs for Cabaret to feel our way into it. And some of the songs were terrible. and but some were interesting. Never in Paris is an okay song musically, but it has a lyrical idea which is really wonderful. It's he's explaining to Sally. She's basically saying, "Why did you come to Berlin to write?" And he's explaining he's come to write his novel, and then he has a song about all the places he can't write, and in particular Paris, because there's just too much in Paris to make you stay in and write. It was a very early song we wrote for him.
Well, Scott, I want to make sure we talk about the songs that the audience will be hearing next week. Can you talk about how you chose the 9 songs that you chose?
Well, it's always a complicated thing because we wanted to represent as much of the Kander and Ebb canon as we could, so we wanted to spread it out, not have too much from any one thing, and have a nice variety of songs that hit different notes, if you will. So among the songs, without giving too much away, I mean, we have 2 from Chicago and 2 from Cabaret, but the rest are individual songs from The Rink and Flora the Red Menace and Steel Pier, Woman of the Year. So we wanted to spread it around as much as possible. And as always, when it comes to a concert, the key to a concert, I think, always is matching the singer with the song. So we wanted to make sure that whoever was singing something that was a good match for them. So I'm hoping that when we put it all together, which should be very soon now, given that the show's coming out next week, that Mr. Kander will be happy with it, and that the audience will enjoy these songs all over again, because it's very important to tell the stories in each one of them. I mean, I think that's a big key to what we're doing in this Broadway by the Year series. When we did it in the Cole Porter show 2 weeks ago, and hope to do it again in the Andrew Lloyd Webber show that follows this one, is to have each song be a story, and tell the story, and it always doesn't have to be in the context, and it isn't necessarily in the context of the show that it came from, but its own context, that it tells its story within the song itself, and that the singers have a key to it, and unlock that door and give us a look inside of that song. For those who don't know, among the people who are starring in that concert, singing these 9 songs from Kander and Ebb's career, we have Uta Lemper, who actually I would hopefully have a chance to ask John this question if you happen to have seen her in the Paris debut of Cabaret, where she played Sally Bowles, and it was the first time Cabaret played in Paris, and she won the Newcomer of the Year award. I love that idea. That's how far back we go with it. But Uta Lemper's in it, Beth Level is in it, Tony Yazbek, who played Billy Flynn in Chicago a number of times, and Natasha Diaz and Danny Gardner, and
What's Natasha saying?
Chief Cook and Bottle Washer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I just saw a clip of it that we're putting it together, and she's terrific. I think you'll be very happy.
I'm sure I will.
So, Jim, are there any songs on the list that you wanted to talk about, or?
Well, I wanted to ask John about The Enchanted, which is a musical he's written twice, and once, I think, since your 90th birthday. So what is that a project that's still going on?
It exists. We have to go back to it, but we have this is with a writer named Greg Pierce, who I've done several pieces with, and who is very, very talented. The Enchanted started back when Jim and Bill and I were all living together, and Jim Goldman and I I particularly had fallen in love with that play many years before. I seem to be the only one in the world who did, but I still love it. I love what it's about. And we had written several songs and a sort of a scenario for it. And we managed to get a couple of agents from ICA, what was called MCA then, to come and hear it. And they brought their assistant with them. And he came to us after they had left and told us that they had stopped talking about it the minute they got in the elevator, but that he thought we were talented, and if we had anything that we wanted him to look at, see if he could represent, we could do it. And his name was Dick Seff. And so when we wrote Family Affair, we took it to him, and Dick got it produced. He really did it. If anybody is responsible for that piece getting on the stage, it's Richard Seff. He even sang auditions, and he was very involved in our careers until he stopped being an agent.
I think Richard Seff was a subscriber to Broadway by the Year, by the way.
I'm sure. We heard from we wrote to each other about a week ago. I rarely see him now, but if I think back on it, he really started our careers.
Well, maybe he could produce the new version of the Enchanted.
I think he stopped so he could write and act, which had been his first love. But I will never forget his coming back on the elevator. He pretended that he had forgotten his gloves or something like that. And he had come up on the elevator to tell us that they just stopped. Our names were never mentioned from the time they got in the elevator now.
Well, John, you mentioned Greg Pierce, and I was wondering what's it been like working with different writers since Fred died? You know, David Thompson or Lin-Manuel Miranda. What's the writing process like with them?
There haven't been many. Lin-Manuel and I are just friends, and we wrote a song together because it was fun to write a song. He came over. I'm up in the country now, and he came over and we wrote a song together. We had a really good time doing it, but that's the only time. Tommy Thompson has been a part of our lives since the revival of War of the Red Menace, and he and Susan Stroman became very much a part of our lives, and they still are. We did the review of The World Goes Round together, which he wrote, and he wrote Scottsboro Boys, and the three of us are working on a musical version of the film New York, New York, very far away from the film, but we had some ideas, basically writing a piece about New York in 1946, when the world is opening up again, and it seemed pertinent. Then Greg, who with whom I wrote a piece that I'm very proud of. Actually, I did 2 pieces with him, and he is my collaborator on the Enchanted, and one day we will go back to it.
That's wonderful. Well, one question I have to ask, and it's movie related, is where are we in terms of a film version of the Scottsboro Boys? I know that there have been news that, possibly Lee Daniels was going to adapt it.
I do not know. I know.
Okay.
I know that there have been discussions with various studios, and but exactly, every once in a while I hear that something is happening, and then suddenly it's not happening. And you can tell from the way I handled trying to get onto this Zoom that probably detail work is not my best thing.
Well, you're here, and we're so grateful. Scott and Jim, do you have any more questions for John or anything you want to discuss before we head out?
I was just wondering, how often do you go see productions of your work when they're revived, or if in the case of Chicago, it never ends, the revival doesn't end? How often do you go back and see them, and what is it that you look for when you go back?
This is going to be hard to explain. There are a couple of shows where I went back a lot. The Rink was one. Scottsboro was one. But once your show is open, it's that is real. The company that's when we're all working at is really my family. It's very intense.
Mm.
And then when it's over, it's not the same. And the people that you loved, you still love, but in some way, it's like you feel like a visitor. And so I don't go back all the time. I don't go back probably as much as I should, because it doesn't have anything to do with changing my affections. But there's something that in me that makes me feel it's sort of awkward. In the Rink and in Scottsboro, there's something, maybe because they both have small casts, but I kept going back over and over to the Rink, and the same with Scottsboro. It wasn't about seeing the production again. It was going back to visit with my family.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for joining us, all three of you. It's been incredible learning and hearing you speak to each other as well. So thank you so much. John, I know that people are going to be so excited to see you. And Scott, thank you for the show. And Jim, thank you so much. I'm so excited about the book. For everybody watching, please join us next week. You can go to thetownhall.org to get your tickets. And I just want to say that if you like programs like these, like this conversation, please go to thetownhall.org/donate to support programs like these. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. It's daytime for us, but evening when you'll watch this. And come to Broadway by the Year. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.